Oh.
Tim wins.
What does Tim get?
I don't know. I gotta figure it out, but he wins. So when it comes to the seminars, I wanted to do the whole, like, if you're not here or you do a second seminar and this is all for credit, it's just too damn much. So I'm just gonna hold seminars and you come if you can, and if you can't, they'll be up there for you to review, but it's not for credit. Your credit's gonna be based on your discussion. It's just, I can't, I give up. Okay. Too quick to turn 4 classes around and have like data collection set up. I can't do it. So, but still, we're doing all right. Otherwise, it's really good to see all your beautiful faces. It really is.
Y'all.
I finally got my camera working.
Yay!
I miss going to GCC. I miss like actually coming to class.
Same.
Yeah. Now is everything online. One of my classes doesn't even have a seminar or anything.
I hate online classes so much.
Yeah.
Like, I specifically went to GCC so I wouldn't have to do online classes. And then this happened, and I'm, like, struggling so hard.
I don't hate it, but it's definitely not what I prefer.
Yeah.
It's definitely different. And I know that, you know, we're all kind of thrown into this circumstance together. And if you wanted to be in online classes, you would have chosen online classes. You know? I totally hear that coming from the students. When my dean is asking me, like, what kind of feedback are you getting? And I'm like, no, you know, online is hard, and this is an ugly change in the middle of the term, and it's upsetting. You know, but all I can say is, you know, we're all in it together. You know, it was none of our choices.
Yeah.
So I was telling another student, like, I was inspired by this one student who was, you know, talking about how this has been a challenging transition. And it's just kind of like, yeah, this is one of those moments that we're going to look back on, you know, when you're older, you look back on it and be like, that was one of those moments where we persevered, you know, through all the obstacles. And even though it was uncomfortable, it was hard, you know, we did it. And so it's really challenging right here, right now. But when we're on the other side of this, you're going to be so proud of your tenacity and your ability to navigate all of this. Right? It's going to be a new skill set you're going to have.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, you know, we just do the best we can.
So we're all going to be addicted to TikTok after this.
Nah, I'm still not in the TikTok world. It's not my cup of tea.
I had to get off because there are all these like really pretty girls who always have their makeup on perfectly, and I'm just like, I feel like a snail.
I just downloaded.
I'm too old.
I'm just sitting here being a potato. Like, my head's shaved too, so I'm just like, hello, potato face.
Now, is that a big squishy chair that you're in with all that white fur? Or is that just like a blanket you're sitting on?
This is a big squishy armchair, and this is a multiple stitched together lambskin.
That's nice.
Wow.
I feel like we all deserve those if we're going to be in
So, yeah.
isolation, right?
Me and my friends have dubbed this the throne, because it's just this giant chair that I can like sit fully sideways in.
That's sweet.
Yeah. Usually when everything's all set up normally, like half my stuff's in Greenfield, half my stuff is here, because I'm with my parents. Normally I have a sword that I got at a Ren fair, and it's usually hanging on the wall behind the throne.
Nice.
It's this big, like, the metal's been treated so it's like blue, and it has like runes in the side. It's a big sword.
Nice.
Yeah. So,
weapon.
hello, I'm a nerd, and I'm proud of it.
I got a sword right here.
Hey.
Swords, huh?
Actually, 3.
Is that where we're at?
Swords are
Yes.
always a good option. I don't feel like they've
Always.
ever gone out of style.
I have things,
Actually,
but they're
4.
not swords.
I was in my house a few months ago, and I found this like old lightsaber, like one of those ones that extends out.
Yes! Oh my god, I have one of those in my basement.
Need a couple.
It still makes noises and lights up and everything.
Nice.
Okay, I'm actually working while you're enjoying yourselves over there. So I've updated the journal here. It's due this Sunday. I'm going to show it to you again. Let's see, here you are. Can you see the classroom?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, so if you scroll down here, I'm opening it back up. April 12th, now it says, take a few minutes to update me on your progress with your research. Does that feel better?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Delightful.
All right.
Is there any
Very good.
specific length that it has to be, like 300 words, or
I
is
just
Yeah.
put it in there, 300 words. It's in there. It's in
Oh,
there.
it is? Oh, okay.
All the little details your sweet student minds need should be right there, you know? I know it's like in these kind of moments too, it's like, here's a description. Like, can I have a rubric? It's like, here's a rubric. It's like, can I have an outline? And I'm like, no. But when you're online and you're not getting that face-to-face as well, I think it makes us feel a little bit more vulnerable, right? A little more
Mhm.
disconnected. And so it's like, you know I know I have it right? Am I sure I have it right? So
Yeah.
you know, I'm holding office hours every week. I try to do it on rainy days so that you and I can both go outside, you know, and catch the blue rays when they're out. But I've got extensive office hours. I'm happy to meet with you individually if those hours don't work for you, but try to go into the hours because I have about 90 of you. And, you know, I'm trying to be there for everyone. But when I schedule a bunch of student meetings back to back and I start getting them conflicted and 2 people at one time and then 4 people don't show up, it's just, you know.
Yeah, I tried to log into your office hours last Friday because you said we were going to meet at like 3 or 3:30, and I tried logging in at both times, and both times it didn't work.
So what happened on Friday, here's a lesson for you. I started office hours at 10, but I was actually on with a student at like 9. And I thought that, you know, with office hours that I would be able to like kind of grab some food at one point and do some work. But instead, there were so many students who had questions that I was literally on Zoom back to back.
Oh my
from
God.
about 9:30 till about 2:45 when I had to shut down because like I had to stop just to use the facilities and come back. And I got really nauseous and vertigo. And then I couldn't like focus on anything that was too close for the rest of the day. And I couldn't get on the computer the next day. So I don't know what you might call that, but I call it like Zoom poisoning. Like, you know, when you're
It sounds like it might have been a migraine triggered by eye strain from being in front of a screen too much. If you don't already have this going on, it would be a really good idea to go into your computer settings and put your night light or blue light filter on, because blue light can trigger more eye strain.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a note for everybody who's spending a lot of time in front of a screen right now is if you can do anything to tint your screen to be less blue toned, it's going to help a lot with like headaches and eye strain.
Yeah, so thank you. And I do apologize. And I have office hours, but you'll see they're split up now. I have no more than 2 hours at a time because I just don't think it's healthy for us to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you took care of yourself, but I was like, I wanted to let you know that I did try to log in for our meeting.
And
I was like,
I
feel like something must have happened. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I figured something must have happened.
Yeah, if I could have sent an email to everybody, I would have said, hey, I have to close down early. But I honestly, it was just like, it just hit me at that point.
It sounds like a migraine.
Well, it was awful. So
yeah, migraines suck.
So everybody, no more than 2 hours at a time. Okay, that being said, I want to get into the content and reconstruction and start. I think we're gonna, you know, depending on where we get today, I probably will just extend some of the readings and content from this week into next week. Yeah, we might just chew on the same subject because you have the digital history reconstruction and then you have all this law that comes later. And Deb is like, that was a lot, huh?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe we'll just stay here for 2 weeks and we'll start with reconstruction and then we'll go into the law and all that next week. How does that sound with Plessy?
Perfect.
Sure.
Okay. Riley, you there? Brendan, you
Yes, I'm
there?
here.
Nice. Emma? Everybody can hear me? All right. So I'm going to show you my screen, show you my screen. Hold on. All right. You see, oh, you don't see my screen.
No.
Oh, Alyssa, here we go. There we go, Reconstruction from the beginning. Can you see Reconstruction slide?
Yep.
Yep.
Oh, this is not the right one.
Oh,
Well,
no.
it does say Reconstruction.
Let me see. Hold on. Just because it says 106, I want to make sure this is the one that I was adapting for our African American history class. Yep. Okay, we're good. I just need to retitle this. It should say HIS 1. Well, I was working with two different. Anyway, this is. Never mind. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
127. Okay, goodness gracious. Here we go. So, Reconstruction, right, is a period of time that starts with the end of the Civil War. It's about 12 years long, and it's the time in which the southern states that had seceded, that had broken from the Union, were being brought back in politically. Remember, Abraham Lincoln never saw these rebelling states as separate from the Union. And so when the war is over, Lincoln is looking for a way to bring them back in while also addressing this new environment, new reality of millions of newly freed people, right, that are in a hostile environment. And so the federal government is going to, for the first time in our U.S. history, directly engage in the lives of the citizens within the states. And that's a really big concept. And the reason that we need to slow down is because the Reconstruction amendments, especially the 14th Amendment, I teach a whole class just on the 14th Amendment. And this is not just about a historic group of people who have been displaced in the South. The 14th Amendment impacts our lives, today in meaningful ways. And so understanding the trajectory of the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendments through the 20th century, through to the 20th century, is important to understanding the role of the federal government and the role of the state governments, right? And that is important because right now we're in one of those moments, right, where our federalism is being questioned. I send you all kinds of articles about what's happening with the shift and balance of power right now. So this is where it begins to originate when we think about the idea of equal protection and the idea of citizenship as a means of protection rather than just duty to a country. And so what is this going to mean? What is the meaning of freedom? How do you define freedom?
Liberty and
Happiness.
Yeah. Liberty and what?
liberty and justice for all.
For all, right? We love that idea. Liberty and justice for all.
Sure.
Being able to choose what you want to do, like go to college or work, or
The freedom to live your life.
Our understandings of freedom are based upon our realities, right? And each of them are a little bit different. But if you are a newly freed person, the question of what is freedom is very poignant, and no one's defined it yet, right? So during Reconstruction, there is this struggle that's going on between the branches of government, between the state and the federal government, and between the ideologies of those who believe in equal protection and equal rights for everyone, and those who believe in the protections of their interests as they've held for so long. And that's a lot of struggling that's going on, right? And so, what is it going to look like? Baptist minister Garrison Frazier, he defined it, right, by defining slavery, meaning an irresistible power for the work of another man, right? To be enslaved is to be, unable to resist the demands of other people upon you without your consent, without your benefit. And so freedom meant placing us where we could reap the fruits of our labor and take care of ourselves. And the question is, who's going to do that, right? And what does that really mean? So protection against physical punishment, does it mean separation of families? Now we have the right to come together and go find our families because, under, the slave era, families were split up all the time. What about access to education, as Deborah was saying, right? Exploitation, sexual exploitation, the protections against that, right? Ownerships of guns and dogs and liquor and free mobility, all of this stuff, and job opportunities. So what about you, looking at like this, what does freedom mean for you?
Probably all those things.
Yeah.
Like,
To be honest.
honestly, all of those.
And we take a
Freedom to to have your families. You know what I mean? Like freedom to me means like being able to like live my life like normal. I don't know, like from my perspective, everything. I mean, of course, it is normal to me, but not necessarily to like, you know what I mean? But I don't know.
I feel
Yeah,
like
being able to just choose what it is you want to do and what you want to own, things like that.
Exactly.
okay. So free will.
Yeah.
All right. The ideas, it sounds like you're hearkening back to the Enlightenment ideas of liberalism again. Those things that are embodied in our Bill of Rights, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
The freedom of speech and religion, the ability to go where you want to in the United States, right?
Yeah.
Freedom from, harm and pointed attack. Sure. That's the basics.
also like being able to like own yourself, like have your own identity and like have your own sense of self, which like I just finished reading Beloved by Toni Morrison in my English class, and what I learned from that was even after they were free, they weren't actually free mentally because they like didn't know who they were because half their life had been taken from them, and so they were constantly just living like wondering why can't I like get past this trauma. And I feel like a big part of it was like they didn't know themselves, so I feel like that's a big part, is like being able, like they didn't own themselves until they were free, but then after they were free they were like, I don't even know who I am or how to keep going.
Well, I think, there's groups of people, Shannon, that definitely felt that way. There were other people like Frederick Douglass, or Sojourner Truth, who always felt empowered in that voice and centered in who they were. Not that you don't have like a race consciousness that you wrestle with. I think
right.
Any person of color, any African American has this time, if they're lucky and they get into higher education and they get into these places where they can have these conversations. I went through this trajectory too. It's like coming to understand, who you are, accepting that, and then recognizing, why it is unequal, and then having to like manage and navigate and like and process the anger.
Right.
That militancy. I think most of us, go through that Black Power militancy at some point, and you come out with hopefully, a sense of social justice and desire to help all. But I don't know what kind of trauma y'all been through. We've all been through awful things, but if I compare it to like this institution of slavery, it's taken me so many years to like get through my trauma. Can you imagine?
Right.
Yeah, it sounds
not to downplay anybody else's, but Deb, you've been wanting to say something.
Yeah, when I was going through this, everything, when you're in an abusive situation, it's almost like I can feel for the Black people, because African American, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, every single one of these, when you have it taken away from you, no matter if it's a slave owner or a very abusive, person that is making you do these things and keeping you under control. And when you're finally out of it, you don't know what to do. It's like, oh my God, I can really do this. I can go to school, you know, I can have friends. So I can, on a very small thing, I can identify. I mean, I know that I can't identify all of it, but I'm very empathetic with what the African Americans have gone through.
That's the point, Deb. It's, you know, we don't have to identify exactly with each other on everything, but as long as we're identifying on the idea that my pain makes me appreciate and have empathy for other people's pain, then we're on the right track. And think about, like, you know, I'm seeing this happening in the media and on like my news feed is people being like, you know, never mind, I'm not gonna go there. But like people being like, my civil rights are being violated because I'm stuck in my house, and how long are you gonna, you know, keep me trapped and you know, tread on my rights? And
not what's happening.
what?
That is so not what's happening.
Right.
Also, like,
Oh, sorry.
I was just say, meanwhile, there's people in prisons who are like not receiving the correct medical attention.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Like,
die. So we should just be glad that we're not in prison.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, when we see, you know, some of that liberty being restricted, you know, we start to realize and appreciate it, I think, in another meaningful way. So these three handsome fellows here were some of the leaders in the Radical Republican Congress. So, you know, fortunately, as the war is ending, you've got Thaddeus Stevens, Charles Sumner, Ben Wade, who are going to be leading the charge on civil rights and answering that question, you know, what is the federal role in all of this? And so the Congress creates the Freedmen's Bureau. And this is exactly what I'm talking about when we say that we say the federal government's intervening on behalf of the individual within a state. They've created these federal departments, federal programs that are now being located in places of need that help and aid these newly freed peoples. I mean, you've got millions of people who, you know, most of them don't read. Most of them, you know, don't have money. They don't have a place to live. They have some skill sets, but, you know, they have not been autonomous before now. And so the question is, how do we help people transition into that autonomy, right? And so the Freedmen's Bureau is this department that engages in so many aspects of life, from creating hospitals, hospitals for Black people, right? In places where none of the resources that have been designed were there for African Americans, all the way to cemeteries and every aspect of life in between. So there was job training, there was schools were a huge part of this, freedmen's schools. And so, in fact, some of the HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities in the South, like Dillard University, where I used to work, was a Reconstruction school, right? That becomes a Black university moving forward. And so you have this federal intervention, but, you know, there's inequity in that. There are places for African-American women to gain power and employment through these agencies, through the educational programs and in these social service areas. But there's no direct funding that's going to be long-term. There's no Social Security that's put into place. That's not going to happen until the New Deal. And the New Deal happens because of the Great Depression. That's the next time we'll see the federal government really engaging again into the lives of the people at the local level. That, incidentally, if this goes on very long, is what the federal government's going to have to do here. So everything seems to be going pretty well. If you look at Congress and you've got the Radical Republicans and they're in there and they've created the 1866 Civil Rights Act. And the 1866 Civil Rights Act says that no one can be treated differently based upon their race. Everyone must be treated equally when it comes to political protections, okay? That's the 1866 Civil Rights Act. It actually becomes the 14th Amendment as well. Do you know why it is that Congress would create a law and then mimic that language in an amendment?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. Can you think of a reason why Congress would pass a law, right, saying the 1866 Civil Rights Act that says that everyone is equal, everyone's a citizen, everyone has same equal protections? Why would they do that and then a year or two later force the enactment of the 14th Amendment, which says the same thing?
In case there was any like misconceptions about like what it originally meant, or maybe there was confusion, or like it wasn't specific enough.
Well, let's do a little bit of American government, because when we start dealing with these laws and these civil rights protections, we have to like think about our federalism. How is a law passed in Congress?
Oh gosh, I now have Schoolhouse Rock in my head.
Yeah, I become a bill.
It has to be approved.
Yeah, a bill becoming a law.
So it has to be passed by a certain members of House and a certain members of Senate, right? And then it becomes
Yeah.
a law.
Yeah.
And once there's a law in place, the Supreme Court can determine whether or not that law is constitutional. And if that law is not constitutional, then the Supreme Court can say that law can no longer stand. So it can be
Yeah.
ended, right?
Okay.
But an amendment, you have to have a certain amount of votes. I think it's two-thirds of the House and Senate, and then it goes to each state. And I think you have to have three-quarters, two-thirds, three-quarters of the states have to then also say, yeah, this is part of our Constitution. And at that point, the Supreme Court can't say it's unconstitutional. It has to interpret the actual law, but that's the only way to ensure. That's what the radical Republicans were concerned about. They were concerned that they would lose power. And once the shift in power occurred, that the next Congress, the Democratic Congress, would come in and would just remove these equal protection laws, right? So, and they
we don't want that.
Huh?
We don't want that.
We don't want that. And they had good reason to be concerned because, very soon after the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln is shot, right? And who knows what would have been the trajectory of Reconstruction and race relations in this country if he had survived. But that is not what happened. And Lincoln, in his attempt to garner enough votes to be reelected during the Civil War, had a running mate, Andrew Johnson, who was a Southern racist, in fact. And so we have this new president that's going to be resisting the radical Republicans in Congress. So the Reconstruction era, 5 days after the Civil War ends, Abraham Lincoln is shot, right? And Johnson, he's like, hey, let's get these Southern states back up and running. These are my buddies, right? And in fact, he says something about that. I always forget to take the sound out of here. So we have, I'm just going to go through it quickly. There you go. This military reconstruction, they divide the South into these different jurisdictions and they're all being occupied by Northern troops. So you've got Southerners who are real hostile, right? White Southerners who are really angry about the situation. They want this to end quickly. And so the radical Republicans and the federal government are like, hey, you can come back. As soon as you have enough people to pass a new constitution that promises adult suffrage for every man, right, you can come back in. And you have to get on board with this 14th Amendment as well, okay? So what is freedom? Well, if you're looking at it from the white plantation owner's perspective in the South, it's very different than what we've been talking about, right? Because their understanding of freedom is to continue to have the privileges and the protections of their class and their race that they've held this whole time. And so for, these former Confederates, we can call them unreconstructed Southerners, right? For the unreconstructed Southerners, freedom looks like resistance to this change. And it's going to be a violent type of resistance in the form of the KKK and the White Citizens League and all of those racist groups. Incidentally, why is it that the KKK is still legitimate and allowed to walk around with this kind of history?
I don't
It's freedom of
understand that
speech.
because literally any other country would classify them as a terrorist group.
But
Freedom
why-
of speech when you have KKK regalia from the 50s and people were burning and hanging from trees. So I'm not sure where, the historical line says, no, you actually have a history of being a, terrorist group and a bunch of murderers, so you can't ban.
Why is the American Nazi Party allowed to exist?
Exactly. Like
Same
in
thing,
Germany, it is illegal to have a Nazi flag or Nazi memorabilia. It's illegal to
Mhm.
use the Nazi salute. And
Yep.
guess what? They don't have a Nazi problem.
Because theoretically, we have a fundamental right to a freedom of speech.
which only applies to white people.
Yeah. Yep.
Basically.
Because
because
look what happened to the Black Panther Party.
Not to mention, or the American Communist Party,
Yep.
or
Gosh,
mention
this
the-
is gonna get wild.
Not to mention the whole
thing pretty good. It's just taking us
very-
a few weeks, but I think I'm figuring out this format. I got all you right here. I can see you over here. I like this.
I was really missing having the class discussion, and this is working for me. I
I'm
like
just working a
Zoom.
little better.
I'm just happy Ian's wearing his cowboy hat still.
Yeah.
I think Ian put it on just for us, didn't you, Ian? I feel like I saw you kind of putting the hat on.
Yeah.
The cowboy
Yeah.
hat is very important.
It is thundering and lightning here.
It's thundering and lightning here too.
All of a sudden, there's a big flash and then a big whoa.
Yeah, just rain for now.
Yeah,
It's thundering here.
there's
I love
like
your hat.
I got me
currently a
an
pause in the brain, and then it
my
keeps
lap.
like having like major
Yeah, we just
downpour,
got
and then it will
big.
pause. And
I wonder if, oh, poor puppers.
My beagles are terrified of thunder, and they always come running into my room whenever they're scared. We used to live in Florida, so they're running in here now.
My cat goes under the bed.
You getting that hat on, Finny Fin Fin? I'm waiting to see it again. Trying to show Ian up. Let's see it.
Oh, I wish I had a hat.
Don't
I
make
got
me
a
go and
hat,
get more
hold
hats
on.
out of my closet.
I have my
Wow.
dog.
I got my
Uh-oh.
Mardi Gras.
Got my work hat.
Cat day. I love
oh, puppy.
Yeah.
Hat party.
Yeah, hat party.
it. You look like a little Southern belle.
Well, I caught this hat and this boa off of a float, and look at this. See if-
Oh, fancy.
Oh my god, that's so cool.
Oh, that's perfect.
Sherlock Holmes here.
Yeah.
Where's your pipe?
That's amazing.
Right? Where's your
Give me a
boa?
second. No, I don't have one.
Elementary, my dear Watson.
So back to wholesale destruction, But yeah, so radical changes with the military defeat and emancipation. So in the South, you've got not only hostile, angry, unreconstructed Southerners. You've got a whole group of white people who are just devastated, right? And then you have these newly freed peoples who are looking for each other and trying to deal with this ramifications. I'm gonna take this off now, huh? It's kind of hard. I'm talking in my. I like my hat. I'm keeping it on. Okay. So,
Yeah.
there was this forced requirement of submission through this military occupation. Incidentally, it's the same kind of occupation that's going to create more resentment in Germany between World War I and World War II. And then, you've got more than 1/5 of the white male population who died, and this is majority of the men who died were those who were of working age, right? Most of all the battles happened in the South, so all that destruction. You've got what's his name, Tecumseh Sherman, William Tecumseh Sherman, who marches from Atlanta to the sea, right, and destroys major cities, and it just brings the South to its knees. And most of those who had money in the South put their money in Confederate bonds. So everyone is broke. And that's not going to ease tensions any, It's just not. And so what is it General Braxton Bragg said? All was lost except my debts.
Yikes.
Yeah.
That's
So
scary.
this is the environment in which the Northerners are trying to, in the Union, right? And I say Northerners being a Southerner, right? I'm saying
Yeah.
that just because this is the narrative, and it still is quite present in the society, right? But this is the environment in which the Northerners decide it's time to change these racial, social norms that existed. Or AKA just ensure that everyone has equal rights, right? So I'm just trying to give you two different perspectives on that. I think you know where I land on it, but if you don't, we can have a conversation about that. So Andrew Jackson here, he's going to issue these proclamations. He's going to try to make it much easier for the Southerners to get in. He's going to offer pardons, right, with property rights restored and political rights restored. And that means that coming right back in, these unreconstructed Southerners are going to gain access to their land and also political power. And so that's going to have a major impact on race relations. I got to take this off now because it's serious. And so what we see is the emergence of these black codes. And does anybody know what those were?
No.
No.
I haven't researched it yet. I was going to.
Okay. Well, black codes were laws that were directed towards newly freed peoples, right? And these laws, there's ones like you see here, that African-American men weren't allowed to serve on juries, or marry or socialize with white people. So we're beginning to see the segregation, right, being put in place. If we can't have it politically, we're going to have it somehow. Beyond that, you couldn't own a firearm, or be drinking alcohol. If you were considered loitering, like if you were just in the streets, you would be picked up, arrested, put into jail, and then your former owner would come to jail and they would convict labor, right? They would sell your labor back to that same plantation. You could find yourself back on that same plantation under the whip again.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
And, people weren't really loitering as much as there were families that have been broken up, right? There's a new reality going on. You're trying to find each other. How do you do that? Shannon, can you think about, like, you're in Georgia and, your child was pulled from your breast, right? And sold into South Carolina. That's all you know. What are you going to do?
I'm going to go find them.
Right.
I'll do anything
If you're not gainfully employed, then you can go to jail. But guess what? The entire South is broken, right? And if I have one job, am I going to give it to a white person or a black person?
White person.
Yeah. So these black codes, right, were ways to kind of limit the rights and the protections for African Americans. Incidentally, Eric Foner talks about this in Give Me Liberty, the structure of African American family life in this century, this later part of the century. While Reconstruction witnessed the stabilization of family life, because now we are able to come back together, right? We can, subsistence farm through sharecropping. We can migrate north even if we want to, right? There's these big exoduses that are going to occur. But as emancipation increased, it also increased the power of black men, not me, black men rather, and brought to many black families the 19th century notion that men and women would inhabit separate spheres. Now, Chris and I were talking about that, but what does that mean, do you think? What is Eric Foner saying here?
Like gender roles? Different
Right.
Gender roles.
Yeah. So, as African Americans come into this larger social system, right, the same gender roles that we see begin to apply within the family. And, we could ask the question why. There was an African American or an African studies professor from UMass who came and spoke at my class a few years ago. And his argument was that, prior to the Reconstruction and emancipation, black men could not protect their women from brutality and rape. And so after the Civil War, right, these strict gender roles that are established in the families happen because of the reaction that black men have to their final ability to protect their women. What do you think about that?
It seems, I don't like it.
I can't
It's very sexist, and I don't like it.
I just can't imagine what it would be like to like be married and like you both just have no like power to take care of each other, like you can't, you can connect with each other and you can love each other, but you can't protect each other because you're both Black. So
You're still vulnerable, right?
yeah, it's hard to fathom. I mean, it's like I just can't imagine it. Like,
Well, again, what I said was, if you recall just a minute ago, that the person who came to speak was an African studies, right, professor? Whereas I'm a social justice historian. They're two different things. And so when this person said this in my classroom, I spoke up and I was like, I'm uncomfortable with us asserting that it's the reaction to oppressive slavery that leads to gender marginalization, right? And gender, break. That, you don't have to go along with the quote status quo. But that's easy to say from here.
mm-hmm.
It's easy for me to say that from this position.
Right.
So, I think it's important, to just, I'm only bringing that up because, it's important to think about context, but it's also important to, think about your frameworks and how you look at the past, right? So anyway it goes, we do see these gender roles establishing. And as African Americans come into mainstream society, we're going to see a lot more of that conformity into society. Incidentally, we don't see these same inclusions for like Native Americans. And there is more maternal powers in indigenous cultures, but I have myself witnessed different these gender roles playing out even in indigenous nations as well. So these Eurocentric influences have long arms, if you will.
Mm.
Yeah, this is honestly like a case of causation versus correlation.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate?
Them's big words.
Just because slavery
Was there? It wasn't.
it was I mean, it might have been a factor, but it wasn't what caused. Yeah, it wasn't the deciding
thing.
Okay, yeah. Gender was there, and
yeah.
and we
There's
see
always
these
been the whole there's always been the hierarchy as like women versus like there's always been the whole like with how like men versus women and especially like politics and stuff like that, and how like they're better and everything like that. Like there's always been that kind of like stereotype.
I did some reading on ancient like Greece and like the civilizations, before like gender roles were like invented, and it was actually like in ancient Egypt and stuff, it was actually like a matriarchy, and women were actually allowed to like own property without having a husband. So it was like a long time ago, before like gender was like created, like women actually had like more power, but then it sort of like shifted into like I forget who, some guy said like that once like they needed like social structure and like the economy started like developing, they were like, oh well, women are only meant for the seed of the man, and then it started developing. But there used to be matriarchies before the patriarchy.
Yeah.
On that note, sorry. The Norse people, which people call Vikings, but Viking is actually a verb. It's they went Viking, so it's the Norse people, which is a fun fact. Women could own property, and women were in charge of the finances because the way they saw it, math was like magic and witchcraft, and it was too powerful for men, so women had to deal with doing the finances.
And
And
indigenous.
We have throughout early civilizations, we've got matriarchies, and the kind of like the status quo thought about it is once you begin to engage in what do you call it, like land ownership and territorial protections, aka once you start to go to war over that, we see a shift into more of a paternalistic society.
Didn't the indigenous people, the Native Americans, some of them were, the women took over more than the men
Oh
did?
yeah, and in our earlier civilizations, and then in our systems where we don't have the same kind of land ownership concepts, right? Then we do. We have systems that are more matriarchal. But I'm going to point this out too. If you remember, I mentioned this, right? That one of the things that the southern states had to agree to, right, when they were coming back in, was look at this, the second one here, right? Adult male suffrage.
Mm.
So, you know, under our concept of victims and victimization, remember Howard Zinn,
Mm-hmm.
right? Ian, what did Howard Zinn say about victims and victimizing? Do you remember?
I have no recollection whatsoever.
What? I'm going to pull it up because it's something that it's important for us to think about, even in these days. So if I go to Eric Foner, no, not Eric Foner, Howard Zinn. Does that make sense? Victims and victimization, Howard Zinn, do you remember that?
Yeah.
The People's History of the United States. Here it is.
I remember something about it.
That's okay. I'm not going to pick on you anymore. It's not fair. Okay. You see history as a weapon? You see it?
yes.
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 Okay, I'm just going to do this real quick. Oh, right here, go quick. And I'm going to say victimization, victims. Here we go. And here it is, right here. You see it? My point is not to grieve for the victims and denounce the executioners. Those tears that anger cast into the past deplete our moral energy for the present, and boy, don't we need it, right? And the lines are not always clear. In the long run, the oppressor is also a victim. In the short run, and so far human history has consisted only of short runs, the victims themselves, desperate and tainted with the culture that oppresses them, turn on other victims. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Yes.
So when African American men, where'd you go? I hate this. There it is. African American men, when they gain the access to political power, are they going to challenge that? Or are they going to, you know, protect it?
They're gonna, I mean, protect it.
Right.
Yeah. They're
Right.
not like, oh, just because women don't have the free, I'm gonna take it. If it's offered to me, I'm gonna take it.
Right. And it begins a divide. All right. Just like with indigenous nations, if you give certain indigenous nations federal status, right? The federal government identifies and respects your nation, but not this one over here.
Right.
That's a dividing tool. You see?
Turning them against each other.
Hmm?
It's like turning them against each other.
Yes, and we're going to see this when it comes to what we talk about next week, which are these Reconstruction amendments as they're internalized, as they're interpreted by the Supreme Court. Because in the South, segregation is going to emerge, and the unreconstructed Southerners will engage in violence to keep down Black male votes, right? And to keep African Americans down, whole stop. And yet, by the turn of the 20th century, a white man in the South is making still, I think, a third of what a white man is making in the North. So honestly, right, the shared experience in the South should be what brings them together. But if you've given a few just a little bit more than the other, you can keep them divided, right? And so that's what we're seeing here. That's what we're seeing here. So can you see what is freedom? Wholesale destruction?
Nope.
No.
Oh, okay, see, I'm glad I asked you. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so back to where we were. Andrew Jackson, Black codes, women, you're talking about, look at this. This is what our state congresses looked like in 1868. Look at that. Radical members, right? South Carolina. What do you see here?
Black people.
A lot of Black people,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
right? A whole lot of Black people who are now in political power over the states. Oh no, right? That's not gonna last. Did you ever think
That's
you'd
gonna
see
go
this
poorly.
in South Carolina?
We don't,
Not even today is it
we
this
don't
salt
even,
and pepper.
no, we don't even see it now. Like, that's
Right.
great.
And so when the Southerners are able to claim back their power under Andrew Johnson, right, it's going to be a huge and fast shift. And that's why Andrew Johnson is going to be the first president to be impeached, right? The efforts by Congress, because Johnson puts up so many roadblocks to the establishment. I'm not clapping at that, to the establishment of these laws. So let's take a look at these laws, right? These Civil War amendments, or Reconstruction amendments. You've got the 13th, which is freedom freedom from slavery, all right? Unless you've been, imprisoned. You've got the 14th Amendment that says all persons born in the U.S. are equal under the law. And then you've got Black male suffrage, right? So Michael Ross, who is a legal historian, makes this argument, and I think by the end of our class, you'll agree. Understanding Reconstruction and the role of the Supreme Court played in this era is essential for understanding U.S. constitutional history and the society we live in today, right? Because although right now we're talking about laws and amendments that were constructed for African American people, right? Your protections based upon your identities all stem from this moment. All stem from this moment. So the 14th Amendment, right? Again, it was originally there to protect former slaves and free Blacks from these unfair laws like the Black Codes, right? That were targeting them. And it made it the government's responsibility to enforce these rights. So what kind of citizenship do you possess, do you think? Where does your citizenship lie? Where does your citizenship lie? Have you thought about that before? What kind of citizen are you? You're a U.S. citizen, right?
Yeah. It's a big question.
Are you a citizen of a state?
Yeah.
And so you have two types of citizenship?
I'm a citizen of America, United States, all of them.
Yeah, that's kind of the question.
Yeah.
See, we're at a moment, right, when the Constitution is being examined from a different perspective, Deb. Remember, we're looking now at, what is the type of protections that we have to protect equally? What does that mean to have equal protection?
Oh.
Okay, it's the first time we're asking it because now all of a sudden we've got, like millions of people who really want to know. And so if we look at the actual Constitution, the 14th Amendment, very short phrase, this is all persons born and naturalized in the United States, right, subject to the jurisdiction they are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Two types of citizenship.
Okay.
Okay? No state shall enforce or make any law which shall abridge. What does that mean?
Like cancel out?
Yeah, or override, right? Shall, somehow abridge the immunities and privileges of the citizens of the United States. What does that mean?
The
That's what clause mean.
states can't make laws that goes against the 14th Amendment. They don't have the power to.
This is a 14th Amendment.
Right. They don't. The states don't have the power to enforce.
Trample on your federal rights.
Right. They can't go
Right?
against federal law.
The Constitution is federal law, Deb. Right? And this is saying here, hey, states, listen up, right? You can't block anybody's federal rights. You follow me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really important to understand when we get into what happens in 1883 and 1875, all the way up to the Plessy decision. You have to understand these frameworks. That's why we're working on it here. So where does citizenship rest? It rests in two different places. But what are privileges and immunities?
Right.
Joshua, what are privileges and immunities?
So for me, that kind of means like, kind of you can't treat people differently based on if
That's equal protection. That's the
Yeah,
next clause
equal.
down here. But what are privileges and immunities? It's okay. It's a trick question. We don't know. All right. The Supreme
Of
Court
course I
hasn't
get the trick
interpreted yet
question.
because radical Republicans have just written it. So yeah, that was kind of mean. But no, so we don't know yet. All right. We don't know what any of this means yet because they just made these laws. But look at this. So that's one clause, and that's called the Privileges and Immunities Clause. And you'll probably hear throughout your life, right, these conversations about the law around privileges and immunities, and this is where it is. The other one is the Equal Protection or clause. So it says, no, nor shall any state, so no state, right, shall deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So that's where we're kind of getting into that's it right there. That's the equal protection. That's the first time the Supreme Court, not the Supreme Court, the first time our federal government has acknowledged equal protection. Didn't exist in the Constitution before it. And here it is now. So how are you going to make the states enforce the federal laws? All right. Who makes laws? Which branch of government?
Legislative.
Legislative, right?
Yeah.
Who interprets the laws?
Congress.
Judicial.
Judicial.
Congress, that's right.
Okay.
And, no, I'm sorry.
Judicial.
What did I say?
You said
Congress.
Congress.
No,
Okay.
the judicial branch.
It's judicial.
I was like, wait, what?
Losing it,
I
y'all.
said judicial. And I was
Congress,
like, what?
okay, I'm confusing myself. Congress writes the law. The Supreme Court, right, or the
Esther.
judicial branch interprets the law, and that's also law because it's case law.
Mhm.
And which branch enforces the law?
Executive.
Executes the law, executive, right? But what happens if they won't execute? So the 14th Amendment, right? No state shall deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the law. Think about this. Does that mean that this amendment only applies to states and to state governments? What does equal protection, equal opportunity mean, right? And what, if anybody, can anybody be treated differently under the law? These are questions that are coming up. And then of course you have also here the 15th Amendment by 1870 that gives Black men the right to vote. And it's been amended to the Constitution, so the southern states can't ignore it. They can't get around it. But there is white resistance, right? White resistance, massive resistance is what they call it. Massive resistance is the term of the resistance of the unreconstructed Southerners and the anti-equal protection groups in the North, right, that are going to attempt to derail the interests of the radical Republicans here. So, now, meanwhile, back in the South, right, what's happening? Well, you've got all these poor people, white and Black, and they're now working as sharecropping. This is like one of the largest areas of work for many people in the South, white and Black poor people were working on these plantations, working these lands. And what it would be is, I'd have a piece of property and I'd let you, work it for me. And then you could use part of a plot to raise for yourself. But Deb, you need a job, right? Okay, so you can come work my crops. And I'll give you a piece of property that you can live on, and you can, like, you know, use this own land for yourself. That sounds pretty good, right?
Sounds great.
So you're newly free. Do you have your own plow?
No.
Yeah, do you have any seeds or anything? Any equipment? No? Okay, well,
No.
I'll loan you mine, right? But
Okay.
you're gonna owe me,
Ah,
right? And so over time, it becomes a peonage system where you're just not gonna be able to get off that land.
right.
So these crop liens. So, you know, we have this resistance. This is a, you know, what is the large issue here is this resistance. And that resistance is going to come out in violence to try to block African-American men from voting. Because you saw Congress, didn't you, Shannon? You saw those local congressmen, right? Man, if these black men keep voting, there's going to be all these black men in Congress.
We don't
No,
want
we can't
that.
be having that. Right? And so we see the rise of this white terror. We see the rise of this disenfranchisement
Wow.
and white supremacy. And we have these spheres still of federal power and state power under our constitutions. We have shared rights, but we have federal and we have state laws as well. And do you remember the Fugitive Slave Act? Remember that?
Yeah.
Where, you know, if this guy runs up here, then, you know,
You
the law
go
can come up there and get him. And
Yeah.
then after a time, in fact, the local law enforcement and people have to, you know, help to protect these people who are coming in to get their slaves, right? Remember that?
Right.
Yeah.
The enforcement acts, the radical Republicans create in 1870 and 71, attempt to use that same theory of using the federal government to come in, right, and stop action in a state. But for the opposite, because in 1868, when it was time for the next presidential election, throughout the South, in all kinds of places, Black men were slaughtered by the dozens and the hundreds and sometimes the thousands even to repel their vote.
Mm.
And in response to this, the radical Republicans create these outlawed, or create these laws that make it a federal crime to engage in any kind of terrorist action. Right? Sounds pretty good, right? I mean, protections are there. It's exhausting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
I think I'm going to stop there because it's going to get darker before it gets better, and I don't want to end on a dark note. So I think we'll stop right there, okay? Because we're already coming out of Reconstruction.
Wow.
So let's just stop with the Reconstruction, and we'll come back to the amendments and all that, and I'll break up the reading so that you can see for next week. And we're just going to slow down, not overwhelm ourselves with this much sadness all at once. But there's empowerment in there. You know, there's empowerment because once this Enforcement Act comes into place, these Black soldiers, the soldiers who fought in the Civil War for their freedom, they're going to put those uniforms back on and they're going to go to these courthouses and they're going to protect the entry to these courthouses to ensure equal access to voting. All right. So we do see this type of resistance. All right. What you got to say? Tell me something good.
You have so when you have office hours, you just click on the link and you jump in, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. And if someone's in there, you can sit in there for a minute, you know, and they'll hop off and then you can talk. No big deal.
Cool.
So when you tell you something good, does it have to be related to class, or do you want just good things in general?
Oh, hold on one second, because Emma's trying to talk and we can't hear her.
Okay.
We can't.
Are you able to hear me?
Oh, there you are.
You're very, very
Yeah, I
quiet.
know. So, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think I've been using Zoom wrong. Because this is the first time I've actually been able to see myself. And that happened right after I clicked start video. I guess I was recording, and that enables me to see myself somehow.
We can see you now too.
And I
Yay.
tried to speak a few times, and I couldn't tell if you guys, like, if I was somehow muted accidentally, or if I just wasn't talking loud enough. I don't know. So
There were a couple of funny sounds.
okay, that's probably me.
Yeah, it was like it was jumbled. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was attempting to use my headphones, and they wouldn't. For some reason, Zoom wasn't allowing me to connect. Usually that works a lot better for audio, but anyway.
Well, you're here now.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yay.
I've been here for a while. I guess it wasn't. Yeah, it was working out for a bit.
Well, I'm glad that we can see you now. Yeah, when you come in, if you open up the video, that's helpful. So if we can see what's going on with you, you know.
Yeah, I guess I'm just not used to all this yet.
That's okay. I really enjoyed our hat moment earlier, by the way.
That was really good.
And so I'd like to end today with gratitude, if you don't mind. That makes me feel better if we do that. So I'm going to say something that
I like that.
I have a lot of gratitude for and thankful for, and then you can share something. So I am very grateful for our hat moment and all of the conversation that we had at the beginning. You know, it just kind of like makes it feel more like our circle, our little, you know, African-American class group dynamics. I was really happy to start. I'm happy to see that. I'm very thankful to see that kind of like, you know, kind of re-emerging for us here. So what about you? What are you thankful for?
I am thankful for school. I mean, it's hard, but it's also like a reason to get up every day, honestly. I don't think I would, I think I would probably be sleeping all day. I mean, I do still do that, but I'd be sleeping more if I didn't have school. So I'm really grateful for school. And also everyone's just been so sweet and like, just like, there's a feeling of like connection and community, even being far away, which is great. So it really made me realize how important like connection is with people, for sure.
I'm grateful for Zoom, to be honest. Like, I thought I'd hate it. Like, the online school thing isn't the best, but like Zoom itself is pretty like user friendly, and I don't know, it's like, it's good that we can like, there's so many different options to like look at people and stuff like that. You can have it like showing everybody or a little one, and you can like see people when you're in your browser and share. I just like how many options it has.
Yeah. I'm just grateful that, you know, I get to see everybody again. Or, you know, it's like, I enjoy the class so much.
Mm-hmm.
And now that it's, you know, like kind of awkward that, you know, we're not meeting together, but at least we are seeing each other and we're, you know, having those hat moments. I'm happy.
Put my mind now.
Mine's at the end of my bed.
That's so cute.
Give me a second.
Here, let me get my dog.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh yeah, you're thankful for your doggy too.
oh my God.
Yeah.
He's
And
addicted.
you keep freezing.
Here's Nova.
I've got my cat here.
My doggy's right
Oh.
here. I'm gonna leave him sit. Oh my gosh, Ian.
Where'd my cat go?
Ian, no. Carlos,
I
what
don't know
do
where my cat went.
what do you got to
That's your
for?
protective mask when you go out.
Creepy man. Go ahead, Carlos. What you grateful for?
I guess I'm grateful to still have a job.
That too, yeah.
I work at the Big Y in Greenfield, so it's strenuous. It's a lot of patience, but I'm definitely grateful to still be able to have something else to keep my mind off of things.
And thank you for going out there and doing that for us. Right? Thank you for keeping the grocery stores open.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am extremely grateful that enough people are like practicing social distancing and staying home to make a difference. The most recent thing I heard about projected numbers from New Hampshire is that the estimated number of deaths went from like 50 people down to 1.
Wow.
Is the number of
It's going
people
down.
that they're projecting will have a fatality. Their hospitals are now saying that they're confident they will have enough beds and they'll have enough ventilators. And that's because people actually listened and started staying home. And if
Well-
people hadn't done that, then everybody would still be projecting that the healthcare system would be completely overwhelmed.
Right.
So I'm
Mhm.
really grateful that people are actually like doing their part and like staying away from each other and staying home,
Thank
Yeah.
you.
because it
It's
means
good.
that
But
it's going to be better for everybody.
What are you thankful for?
Me?
Yes.
I'm not. No, I'm just thankful that everyone's here.
He would be thankful for better Wi-Fi right now. Emma, did you say anything about gratitude?
No,
Very.
grateful for a lot of things right now. I mean, this is slightly different, but something I've just noticed is that during this time is that I have been taking a lot of things for granted. Like, I'm just noticing all the things that I miss so much that I was honestly complaining about a lot before. Like, I often would think, oh, I don't want to go to my appointment. I really don't feel like it, and I don't want to go to school. I really don't feel like being in class.
Yeah.
And the list goes on and on. Like, I don't feel like going to work today, and blah 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 blah, and all this complaining. And now I have all this time and to do all of the things I've been wanting to have time to do for such a long time, like sit down and write and play more guitar and just be more creative. And what am I doing? Complaining about it. So it's like I'm realizing I kind of need to. I'm realizing like I have all this time. I need to take advantage of this time and use it well and do the things I've been wanting to have time to do. And also just look at the things I've been taking for granted. And when we are finally out of this mess, I think I'm going to really, really appreciate it all a lot more. So.
Yeah, and if you don't get everything done, don't feel bad either, because
Yeah, no, I don't expect to get absolutely everything done, but close to it. Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember where I heard this from. I think Alyssa actually might have said it, or maybe it was in one of the emails, but I know it came from, I think, Anna Berry. She said, like, we're not like just working from home. We're trying to work at home during a crisis.
Yeah.
Don't feel
important to
guilty
remember
for
that this is a
exactly what
crisis.
you want done. You know what I mean? Like a pandemic is going
Hard to
outside. We
forget.
can't just ignore it.
Yeah, it's hard to focus. You're not alone, and just keep in mind that your faculty members and your administration, we're all human too. So it's, I can definitely understand when you're saying it's hard, and it's like, oh, if I had all this time, and then you have all this time, and you're like, why am I not using it right? But there's lots of articles about the fact that, hey, in the middle of a global pandemic, don't beat yourself up if you're not overly, productive. There's a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
We should all write papers. What I did during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's a struggle.
A research paper instead.
That'd be a really depressing paper.
Who hasn't given gratitude? Brendan, did you give gratitude?
I'm grateful for the steak I got marinating in my fridge.
And Joshua, did you say anything yet?
I'm grateful for, well, it's going to be hard to think of anything.
Wow.
What?
I have nothing to say about that. You're grateful for your hair. Oh, you're so grateful for your hair.
No, I'm kind of hating it, honestly. No, I have a love-hate relationship for it. I'm never going to give it any love.
I mean, you can just do what I do whenever anything's going on in the world or in your life and just do something crazy with it, like dye it a crazy color or shave it off.
Yeah. I guess I'm grateful that I have plenty of time to read. I've been reading Slaughterhouse-Five, and I'm having fun with it. All Quiet on the Western Front, a lot of those books. So I'm having fun doing that. So I guess that I'm grateful for time, even though I'm not using it right. So,
Well, I
yeah.
mean, if what you're doing is helping keep you sane during this, then I would say that you are using your time right.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't be too hard on yourselves.
Yeah, this is a crisis, guys. Don't forget that your brain's trying to process a major shift in life right now.
Yeah, it's also hard not being in control of things, you know, and
Yeah.
control, and I think that's really uncomfortable for everyone.
Ooh, I know something else I'm grateful for. I am grateful for Animal Crossing New Horizons. Because
I've never tried Animal Crossing.
It's so good.
I mean, I like go to bed and I'm excited to get up in the morning and do my morning routine for Animal Crossing. And it's like, well, if it's keeping me sane, I better be grateful for it.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing what you're grateful for and spending this time. And I look forward to seeing you next week. We'll pick up this conversation. I'll divide up the reading, so that should alleviate some of the pressure for you for the rest of this week and for next week, right? And we'll just take it slow and steady and get where we get. But beyond that, you know, next week, you said you want me to see if one of the librarians can come in and do like a little bit of overview and review with you for
Yeah, that would
research.
be nice
Sure.
for me at
Like a
least.
10, 15-minute presentation, something like that. Ian's like, meh, 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 meh.
I don't care either way. So.
You want where do you want?
In there. They're in there.
Well, we can have him come in the first 15, Ian. You can always pop in after that. All right.
I'll be there.
Yeah, there you go. With your hat on. All right, y'all.
I'll have to find a new
Emma,
one.
Brendan, Finn, Shannon,
gonna
all
jump-
of you, my babies.
I'm gonna jump in tomorrow.
What?
I'll see you tomorrow at office hours.
All right.
I'll see you at office hours.
Okay.
Wonderful.
All
See
right.
you guys later.
Bye.
Take it easy. Bye. I care about you. Make good choices. Be kind and wash your hands like this. All right. Bye.
Bye.
20 seconds.